Welcome to Within You, a podcast for seers, seekers, and skeptics. Looking for support to become more present and to learn to lean on your intuition, to guide your choices. This is also called following your sacred heart, that beautiful path of discovery as you turn inward and look within for the answers. Yo soy Viviana Carrasco, modern mystic and spiritual teacher, and it's my honor to be in your ear, to journey with you as you take steps towards that calling, that yearning of your soul. This is the March 2023 episode. It's an intro to a primitive pottery series where I talk a little bit about coyote teachings, how to move your hand, how to move from your head to your hands. And I emphasize doing it in community and accepting that it is a consistent practice that you do over time. So primitive pottery is the way that I have chosen to unlock my holy creativity. It is my current hobby and passion of choice, and it is a wellspring to my well-being and my spiritual development. I feel very lucky to be able to practice it and to have the opportunity to experience being taught primitive pottery alongside my favorite teachers, Andy Ward and John Olson. And you can look forward to the April and May episodes for interviews that I actually had with them. If this episode happens before you listen to those two, give me a bit of grace, because the one with Andy actually was recorded on his property outside Tucson with a fire in the middle of the night. So we were like outside recording it out in under the stars, and I hope that conversation serves you. And the second interview was also a little bit about the same. I was actually with John Olson in his cabin that he built with his hands and the hands of his friends out in Boulder, Utah, close to Boulder, not actually Boulder, but it like primitive pottery in a primitive state almost. There was so much like public land and beauty around me that it was just unfathomable in comparison to what I experience here in Texas, where it's just like bits of little parks and a little compared to the size of the national parks that are in Utah. I have an affinity for the beauty that occurs in Utah and lots of states, especially my own. But I interviewed John Olson in his living room. It was a very interesting conversation with John. And so once you hear this, then I invite you to continue your primitive pottery journey to my interviews with Andy and John. This episode is about my path towards primitive pottery and how I chose it. One of the most meaningful experiences for me was to go back to who I was or how I was seen as a young child. And there's something in the Bible about being childlike, and that passage used to confuse me because I'm like, how can we be childlike in this world, the world that seems to be crashing down, that has nothing but horrible things to say back to me, that points me towards these atrocious things that are happening in the world right now? How can I be childlike in a place like that? And what I've come to know and realize for myself is that it is not that you are naive like a child, but that you have that you see through the eyes of a child, and that is with potential and possibility, and that you, in a way, learn how to break the rules, because the rules limit you. And if you didn't know that those rules existed, what is the potential of what could happen? Lots of my life and the things that came up for me in my life were because I didn't understand those rules, and those rules didn't inhibit me from lots of things. A really silly example is, I think in junior high, I was a bit naive, and I remember being told or asked if I was going to go to college, because apparently I was a pretty good academic. My mother even shared with me that my second grade teacher told her she had a genius on her hands. I don't think that I ever tested that well on tests, but anyway, that was my second grade teacher's perception of me, and thank God for her, because we live up to the expectations that others have of us. And so I'm sure she was an angel in my path. So in junior high, I remember being asked if I was going to college, and I didn't understand what college was. I mean, I came from a family where higher education wasn't something that was discussed or talked about. I mean, we hardly left our small town. I mean, it was a huge deal for my dad to leave Pecos and go to Odessa with my mom, which was like less than an hour away in the Permian Basin of West Texas, where I call home, or the home that I grew up in. And so I now see that seeing like a child is different than being a child or having the naivety of a child, but rather to be open wholly and completely to where you are in this moment and what is emerging from you in this experience. That's what I call that. That's how I have come to understand that passage. And so it was very meaningful for me when I began to explore what brought me joy as a child and how I was seen as a child. And it's kind of, for me, full circle to my truth. Oh, that brings me to a story that I have to share with you. Early in the 2000s, right after 9/11, David deployed. He's was an active duty Army soldier, if you're not familiar with my family and our story. But one of the things that would happen is I would record moments in the boys' lives for David to experience and for me to share with him while he was overseas deployed. And there was one point where the boys had created a fort and they were giving their dad a tour. And I'm, the cameraman behind the video recorder thing. And so I think now that was maybe 25 years ago. And so what's interesting is that in that video clip that I caught, Joshua was the logistician. And so he was showing me how their fort worked, how the supplies came in, where everything was. And, he was probably 12 years old. And that was the role that he took in their adventure. And Jacob, sweet Jacob, he was about 8, maybe 7 or 8, was a lookout. He was acting like a scout. And so he was keeping an eye on everything around and very into his role. So if a car was driving down the street, he'd pause this recording and he'd be like, "Hey, everybody down. We don't want them to be able to see us." And so the reason I share that with you is because at one point in their journey, as they were young men, and both of them served like their father did. Joshua actually did become a logistician for the Quartermaster Corps, and Jacob became a scout. And so part of the scout's role is to go in advance of the infantry, call down, I don't know what they're called, give coordinates for fire, not fire. If you saw me, he actually embodied what he had done as a kid. So I thought it was magical that those things didn't come in unison, but I think it's magical when we can look back and ask our cousins that grew up with us, which I did, how did you see me as a child? What were the things that we did together? Help me to remember, because I couldn't remember. And I had some interesting feedback come in from my cousins. And one of the things that when I asked myself what brought me joy, I actually remember making things with mud. There's a lot of caliche clay in West Texas. And so I don't know that it ever held up, but I would make mud pies and I would make things out of mud. And I loved the way that the water would come together with the dirt and then create mud. And then I could make that mud into whatever I wanted to. So that naturally brought me joy. And it also, in this stage of my life, made me curious about what it would feel like to pursue that kind of creativity. And so that's what led me to exploring what primitive pottery is. Because for me, it's not just about being a potter and turning clay into earthenware, but to do it in a primitive way. So I have, over a series of now, I guess this is my second year doing it. I started to explore it in 2022. I went to my first in-person training with Andy in April of 2023. God willing, I'll be back in April of 2024. But that's what I started to learn. How do I identify clay in its natural form out in the world? How do I process that clay to make it pure, to be able to form it And then how do I fire it in order to turn it into something else? It has been such a beautiful journey for me. Now, I will say that it took me a long time to get out of my head and walk my talk, because one of the things that I say is that you learn about yourself not in theory but in practice. And so same thing goes with like learning how to swim. You got to get in the water. Learning how to ride a bike, you got to get on the bike. So just from nature and just from habit, like wanting to learn how to make primitive pottery, I learned by watching videos, by reading books. And it took me a lot of time and a whole lot of courage to start to like put my hands in the earth and figure it out. And it's nothing that I've come near to mastering, because it is so different every single time. Like even if I have a source now for my primitive pottery, I have clay that I can source locally and then I process. But here's the thing about that source is that if the water has run recently, if it's dry versus wet, like there's all kinds of things that could have happened. If it's at a deeper depth than the one that I took before, like everything is different about it. And that's one of the things that I love, is that there's no rote memory that's going to get you to the same outcome. Like you're just going to have to enjoy being in the process of making it and then surrender to the fire if it turns out, and mixing things in and figuring things out. It's been a wonderful journey and I have met so many great people through it, but it is the way that I unlock my holy creativity. It is the way that I have re-experienced what I felt like I did as a child to bring me joy and what I naturally gravitate to. Now, I don't do it without preconceived conditions or with walls, because I'm just a human being and I have this, but I have to remind myself how to be in the process. And when I am, there's this beautiful, like, and again, I'm going to call it magic because it is unseen, that happens when I listen and I am immersed in the experience. One of the things that I'll share with you is, and I share this with my teacher because we have like a weekly Zoom where we practice making things together. I had recognized as I was making pottery on my own, sometimes I would have music on, but the pottery, like I don't know if it was the vibration or the way that I was interacting with the clay at the time, but the clay didn't like music. And so I now make and build my things without music on, and it just comes out better. Who knows? That could be something that I made up, but it's how I experience it. So I love just being in it. So one of the things that I feel very satisfied, I think is the right word, is that I was able to collect, process, and build these little ollas that I then, David's help, fired into pottery and then gifted to family and incorporated it into a celebration where it was part of the centerpieces in the table. And that was kind of cool. So witnessing myself do that is one part of it. But the other part that seems magical to me about primitive pottery is that it is a metaphor for the transformation that we go through as we evolve and emerge these different levels of ourselves. It also, for me, is like very much me being in connection with myself and with my spirit as I move through the process of it. So it's solitary for the most part. But then what I love about it is that I have a community that I can build and learn with. And then it's also something that I can do with David when we get to the firing step, which is the scariest part for me and the most beautiful. So this is how I currently unlock my holy creativity. And I share a little bit about that with you in the interviews that I hold with my two primary teachers. And so my question to you that I'd ask for you to explore for yourself is, what is the thing or the things that brought you true joy as a child? And who were you and how were you seen as a child? Just so that you can remember as a bit of a reflection. Oh, one thing that I haven't talked about yet is coyote teaching. I know I have a clip somewhere, but I can't find it, of my grandmother telling me how she learned the things that she learned. And she shared that she would learn them sitting beside her mom, who would call her Gavinita, and being mentored in that way, where they're side by side creating with each other. And that is one of the things that I want to encourage you to consider as you find the thing that unlocks your holy creativity, is to consider the old school sort of apprenticeship way about learning it. Now, you know you can't learn it without doing it, but are you learning it from a teacher, from a master, or from a community, or from somebody that just is going to love and encourage you to learn it? I very fondly think back to learning, like I'm not really good at it at all, but I have. My grandmother makes things with yarn. Oh, what is it called? Knitting. She knits. And so every time I visit her, she'll hand me needles and some yarn, and she'll actually send me home with some. But now I have some. And I learn a different way to hook the yarn in order to make it into something. And again, I'm not good at it, but it's just a beautiful process to sit beside her and learn from her. Especially when she shared with me that that's how she learned to do lots of things as she was growing up, is by watching her mom do them. And so who are you looking to for teachings? Who are you sitting beside and experiencing the learning of a thing that unlocks your holy creativity? And that is the invitation to reflect that I offer you in this episode, to consider getting out of your head and into your hands, to consider the community that you have around that activity, and to practice, whether you consider it a spiritual practice or a hobby, whatever you want to call it. It is a way for you to unlock yourself in creation. I am so excited about what you are doing or what you maybe venture to do, and look forward to you sharing that with me if you feel so inclined. In closing, getting started on something like this may seem hard. I mean, it took me a year before I actually put my hands in the dirt of wanting to learn how to experience and make primitive pottery, so I understand that firsthand. If there is any way that I can help you, if you're feeling like you don't know what to do next, or you want to have me as your guide because you're just fed up with trying to do it on your own, or you're just impatient with the progress you're making by yourself, look to me to help you look within and learn to rely on your intuition. I don't want you to feel lost, and I don't want you to feel like you're in the dark alone. If you're ready to feel deeply connected to your own intuition and confident, I do invite you to call or text me at 760-576-5683. That's 760-576-LOVE. You can also explore my website at viviancarrasco.com. In the top right-hand corner, there's a mentoring section where you can browse through the different ways that I'm available to work with you. But if we don't work together and you're simply feeling inspired by my share and by this invitation to unlock your holy creativity, I am excited for you. And I just want you to know that you are an artist. You were born with a gift, and it is your purpose. It is your calling. It is your gift to give this world. So do what you need to do to muster up the courage. Get out of your head and into your hands through your heart. Adios.